Professor, Physician, Epidemiologist. I am Dr. Sri Banerjee. The Sendai framework was especially important in trying to understand disaster preparedness. Hi, I'm Dr. Sri Banerjee, epidemiologist, biostatistician, faculty member, and in this video, I'm going over a little bit more about the Sendai framework, but also how that applies in a way that you can kind of use it um, in a manner that it's like a tool to understand disaster preparedness. First principle of disasters is that you want to make sure that you control for it or you take necessary precautions before it strikes again. And somehow this principle gets lost. Whenever there's a plan in place, many times I just lectured on a number of issues, and sometimes there's a plan put in place, but they fail. They're not implemented. Sustainable development goals have not are not at par with where they need to be necessarily. For instance, Healthy People 2030, for instance, was built out of all some of the failed goals from 2020, Healthy People 2020. So these are all examples of frameworks which fail if you don't plan. So planning is key, and so start with the Sendai framework. Um, so it's taking us a little bit of time, but basically, this is a plan between 2015 and 2030 to try to reduce disaster risk. And it was adopted in 2015, actually, at the third UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. And the reason it's called the Sendai Framework is because it was ratified in Sendai City, Miyagi Prefecture, Japan. And that was the first major agreement of the post-2015 development agenda with 7 targets and 4 priorities for action. And so there has been, since then, a midterm review of the Sendai framework, which I encourage you to take a look at. And so there's some interesting information in the midterm review, which is important to also review in terms of what has happened since then. So this connects actually the Sustainable Development Goals and sees the engagement of all of state institutions and following an all of society approach as a way to go in engaging stakeholders in activities both virtually and in person. So there's some, you can get involved, and I think this is still kind of getting built, this midterm portion. But this goes into some timeline and looking all the way to 2023. So basically, this is much more updated and in progress because there's still countries and stakeholders providing their consultations through 2022. And so next year we'll see a little bit more about this. But if you want to know what's going on in the interim, you can definitely try to get some of the documents. Seems like some of them cannot be found right now. So going back to the main website here, how the Sendai framework is related, and the Sendai framework monitor, and also the indicators. Whenever there's indicators, It's especially important to take a look at these because the fact of the matter is this. Look, you have to know what the goals are. You have to know what you want to achieve in order to uh, realize if you're actually successfully achieving that goal or not. So, for instance, goal target A, and these look very similar to things like Sustainable Development Goals, substantially reduce global disaster mortality by 2030, aiming to lower average per 100,000 global mortality between 2020 to 2030 compared with 2005 to 2015. So um, that's a target, and so disaster mortality simply means, for instance, natural disasters, um, and other disasters as well. And so this goes into how, in different ways, disasters affect people. Kind of reduce the number of people affected. Also, GDP, reduce how much that is affected. Also, reduce the disaster damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services. Reduce all of that. Increase the number with local disaster risk reduction strategies. And this was already by 2020. So locally, it's important too. And then also international cooperation to developing countries because it's more difficult to have sustainable and adequate support for these types of approaches.